Hello and welcome to this video tutorial in which I will be showing you how to paint an Hermetic Blade rubric marine. I started off using a base coat of Chaos Black through a rattle can, and then through the airbrush I apply a coat of rust over the entire model. I just make sure I hit the model from all the edges, and especially make sure I hit it from the bottom towards the top. This is then followed by a coat of chipping medium. I again do this through the airbrush, but if you prefer you can use a regular brush for this. The chipping medium will still look wet when it's actually dry. This is then followed by a coat of turquoise, again through the airbrush, and I make sure I hit as much of the model as possible. If you leave a little bit of the rust visible in the deepest recesses, that's not really going to be a problem for later on painting. When that coat's dry, I take blue-green and I apply this in a zenithal way, nearly at a horizontal way. So I paint over most of the turquoise color. I just leave it visible in the really deep recesses, really deep into the model. Then using Caribbean blue, I repeat this process, but now I'm going to do this in a more zenithal highlight way, more from a top-down angle. Once that coat's dry, I move on to the next layer and I mix Caribbean blue and white in a 1:1 ratio. And now, nearly straight from the top, I apply a coat of this. In this manner, most of the light will be falling on the upper part of the model, and I only make sure I hit like the leg that's pointing outwards a bit towards the back on the top. I leave the model to dry for like 15 minutes, and then I coat it completely in water. The water will activate the chipping medium and enables me to chip the model. I didn't go very heavy chipping on this model. I just wanted to have some scratches and dents on a couple of areas on the model, but nothing too heavy. This is also the reason why I decided not to use any enamel rust washes later on. Next I moved to black and I blocked in the black parts on the model. There weren't that many, just the loincloth and the bolter casing. You can do the entire bolter if you want to. I just didn't feel the need to do the entire model or the entire bolter with the black. Next I moved on to old copper, and as you can see I made a mistake in the painting order, because I actually did this before the black. But it's easier to do the black first. And with the old copper, I just block in all the trims and everything that needs to be gold. This is a pretty tedious stage. It's by far the longest stage on the model. Clearly that has to do with the sheer amount of trimming on the model. It's literally everywhere. But after this stage, the process tends to move relatively quick. For the next layer I move on to Airbrush Earthshade, and I will now wash all the old copper parts. If you accidentally go a bit over the blue armor, that's not really going to be a big deal, but if it's a bigger blob, just pick it up with a clean brush. Once the Earthshade's dry, I move on to Dwarven Gold and I start to roughly highlight the golden parts. This isn't science, it's just going to be a tabletop model, so we're going to make sure we hit most of the golden parts again. As you can see, I try to stay away from the deeper recesses so that there is a nice shadowy effect. Next I used metallic black and I blocked in all the metal parts. Normally I find this is quite a lot on Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines, but in this case it really wasn't that much. It's a little bit like the joints and then some parts on the weapon and the backpack. Next, using anthracite gray, I was going to highlight the black parts, and I did this in a really rough manner, just staying away from the deeper recesses and just going over it a bit. The loincloth, the same thing. I stayed away from the upper part and the bottom part, and for as far as the rest of the loincloth goes, I didn't really care where I exactly hit it correctly or not. It's just to have the initial highlight in place. Then I took non-oil and pretty heavily on the loincloth I washed it, and the same goes for the bolter casing. I washed it using the non-oil. Next I moved on to gunmetal, and using this color I highlighted all the metallic parts. And on the smaller parts I did this more in a dry brushing way, just having a bit visible of it will work. This was then followed by a highlight of silver, and I also highlighted the golden parts with small and tiny lines of silver. You don't need to highlight every single edge of the golden parts, just the ones that are more aimed towards the light or where you feel it's necessary to have a little bit of more effect for later on, for once the model is finished. And again here on the smaller parts I use a more dry brushing way of painting. Next, using Seraphim Sepia, I washed over all the golden parts again. This helps turning the silver in a more gold-like color, where it will still stay, it will keep its effect and stay nice and vibrant. And then it was back to the black parts, again using anthracite gray. I now, with a bit more care, clearly, highlight the black parts again. And now I do pay attention in staying away from the recesses. Next I made a mixture of 1 part anthracite gray and 1 part white, and I apply some edge highlights on the black armor parts, the bolter casing and the loincloth. Again, this isn't really anything fancy. It's purely aimed at getting a nicely painted tabletop model. I then went back to the mixture of 1 part Caribbean blue and 1 part white, and I applied an edge highlight to all the armor panels. This again was a really time consuming layer, but it's really worth it once the model is finished. right at this stage there isn't really a whole lot of painting left to do. So I used Parasite Brown and I started to making the yellow lines on the helmets of the Marine. And this functions as a deep shading and base color for the yellow. Next I moved on to Scrofulous Brown and I reapplied this basically over the Parasite Brown, just leaving little bits of the Parasite Brown visible on both the upper and the bottom side of the yellow stripe. I then made a mixture of 1 part Scrofulous Brown and 1 part white, and I applied this as an edge highlight on the upper side of the yellow bars. Next, using pure white, I paint in the symbols on the bolter casing. This was, well, pretty challenging, especially when trying to film it. But you can also decide to just paint it a bit wider and paint your own markings across. I also painted white on the eyes and white on the gems that I wanted to have red later on. Once that's dry, I use Volupus Pink and I carefully go over the white markings again on the bolter casing. And the same thing goes for the eyes. I paint them in with this contrast paint as well. The contrast paint has a nice effect of just wanting to run into the recesses a bit more than on the upper parts. So it nearly functions like a glaze or a wash in this manner. Then I use tan earth for the basing, and I just with the airbrush carefully spray the entire base with this color. If you have a little bit of overspray on the feet of the model and stuff like the loincloth, that's not really going to be a big deal. It's going to give the effect that the model actually walked through some dust and stuff like that. Next, using bone white, I dry brush the base. After this layer, I took it outside for a dull coat. Once that's dry, I use some gloss varnish and I just paint in the eyes with it to give a little bit of reflection. In case of a lens, I would do the same thing. Using Tamiya Clear Red, I paint over the leftover white parts, the gems, just to give them the nice red vibrant color that these guys have in the artwork that I found. It's kind of important you do this after the dull coat or varnishing stage, because this stays nice and shiny on its own, doesn't need more work afterwards. So I leave that to dry for a while, and then I took light earth, weathering powder from Forge World, and I dusted in the base. I also dusted the bottom part of the model, like the feet and the ankles and a little bit of the shin plates, sorry. And with this stage done, the model is actually finished. I painted on, I put on a tuft and I painted the rim of the base. And this is the end result. So I hope you liked this video. Please like, share, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel if you want to. Dislike the video if you don't like the video as well. But be kind enough to leave me a comment in what you would like to see me improve in my videos. So again, thank you for watching and hopefully see you next time. Bye bye.